5 plus. I hope to answer a lot of your questions this evening. We've gone over a lot of the latest forecast data on air, but if you still have questions, I'd love to answer them. You can text those to us, 479-785-5000. One more time, if you want to grab those phones, I'll give you just a second. Alexandra is going to be helping me out with some of these questions we've been receiving all day long, and I hope to go into the nitty gritty. What I also would hope to do is lift the hood up a little bit. Here on 5 Plus, we're able to spend a little bit more time together so I can show you some of the nitty gritty. I want to go into some of the model data that we've been poring over today, which is not something we often are comfortable with on air because it requires some context. It requires a little bit of explanation, and we can do that here tonight. Again, that number, if you just got your cell phone out, that's 479-785-5000. Winter storm warning in effect from northwest Arkansas. Could it get extended into the River Valley? I think it's very possible. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's not upgraded to that warning at some point this evening or going into tomorrow. Now, I will tell you there is a certain criteria that has to be met or the potential to meet a certain criteria before the Weather Service will go ahead and pull that trigger. Tulsa is responsible for everything Franklin County and towards the west, but the Little Rock Weather Service responsible for Johnson County. They've gone ahead and placed Johnson under that warning. They're also responsible for Logan and Scott counties. If anything, I would suspect Scott and perhaps LaFleur may be not included in that warning. Here are the totals that we're expecting: 8 to 10 inches in North Arkansas. We get close to that Missouri border, so we're talking most of Benton County, certainly the further north you go, most of northern Carroll County. Very well could see 8 to 10 inches. That's going to be on average. Now, very well possible we see a heavier snow band set up that could result in even more than 10 inches. I don't think that's going to be common necessarily. 4 to 8 from Washington through Madison. We get to Sequoia, Crawfords, parts of Sebastian, a good chunk of Franklin, all of Johnson, and a good chunk of Logan. 2 to 4. But here, the further south we go, it's not just snow. It's starting off as sleet, and it'll be several hours of sleet starting to pile up. And then we'll add some snow on top of it as that cold air sinks a little bit further towards the south, transitioning all of the precip over into snow. Now, we get to the southern half of LaFleur. We get into Scott, southern Sebastian, southern Logan. Yeah, trace to 2 inches of mostly sleet, but a little bit of snow maybe wrapping around on the top side of that. Now, we have updated these numbers. This is a little bit different than what we had out there this morning. Here's the reason why. All day long, all of the weather model data, I shouldn't say all, a majority of the weather model data started shifting the axis of heaviest snow a little bit further towards the south. And the reason it started doing that is not necessarily surprising. These weather models almost always underestimate the ability of that cold Arctic air to get further south in and around the Ozark Plateau. And so once they pretty much caught on today that, oh, hey, that's going to make it a little bit further towards the south, that really changes the game. Changes a lot of what we expect in terms of impacts, accumulations, even timing to some extent. Okay, give the number here, 479-785-5000. Alexandra, if you have some questions that you're ready to lob my way, I want to do my best to get you some answers out there. And in the meantime, we'll probably do some deep dives into some of the weather model data as well. All right, hit me with your best shot.
Okay, this is a pair of questions, but same theme, okay?
Okay.
We have Brad from Fort Smith and
Brad.
Bill from Bella Vista.
Good evening,
both
Bill.
of the, so opposite spectrums of our region, of our viewing area, but they both want to know, is this going to be wet, heavy snow that's not fun to shovel? Or is this going to be dry, light snow that they can just take a leaf blower to?
It's always a great question. I'll tell you, it's not going to be like the system back in January. Sometimes we often, as meteorologists and just humans in general, we try to compare things to previous events. This one's a little bit different. This one's going to be more of a dry snow. Now in the River Valley, where that, I think it was Brad in Fort Smith, right? You're going to get a little bit of sleet at first, and that's going to compact into eventually a layer of ice out there on roadways, sidewalks, and that's going to be tough to shovel. But where we're expecting mostly snow, it's generally going to be a lot lighter. It's not going to be that fluffy, wet snow that we dealt with back in January. So this one's a little bit different. Good question, really good question. Not the best snow for snowmen or snowball fights, unfortunately, for the kids out there and for the big kids, those of us as well. It's not going to be the best for that. All has to do with how much moisture is in the air. We're looking at right now closer to a 15-to-1 ratio, which means for every inch of water you get, you're expecting about a 15 inches of snow. That's what it translates to. I don't think we're going to be getting that high, right? At least here. You go north of the Missouri-Arkansas state line, you very well could get close to it. Places like Joplin, the further north you go, better access of moisture there for us. Next question, what do we got? That was a fun one.
All right, Scott, we have a few people chiming in saying they want to know what's going on in Scott County. tomorrow?
What's going to be going on in Scott County tomorrow? Yeah, so we find ourselves back in this this area where the cold air is going to take a little bit longer to get to you folks in Scott County. And we'll work our way down into the Washitas here. Trace to 2 inches, I think, is going to be pretty common. It's going to be mostly sleet. At first, though, it's going to happen as rain. In fact, I'll even cue Futurecast up and show you that. What we're going to find in Scott County, southern LaFleur, places like Heavener and Worcester. Good evening to everybody in Worcester and Podo and Heavener there in southern LaFleur County. This is 7:30 tomorrow morning. Okay, and we look closely at these temperatures. Waldron at 31, you got some rain moving in. That's where we start to see that thin glaze of some freezing rain. Podo at 34, so we're kind of really close to that line. Once things start to cool down, we very well could see that thin glaze of ice. It's interestingly so, accumulation, this is some silly science here. When things accumulate, it's falling from the clouds and accumulate on the ground. But when this rain falls and it starts to freeze, it's actually called accretion. It's not accumulation, it's accretion. Anyway, some technical jargon there. We'll start to accrete some of that ice on elevated surfaces. Waldron at 30. Love you folks in Scott County. Good evening, everybody there. Next question.
All right, someone asked, I live between Muldrow and Gans. Is our forecast for north or south of I-40?
Yeah, that's a good question. We use the I-40 corridor as a broad landmark just because everyone knows where it's at, right? Is your forecast for north or south of I-40? What does it include? I'll tell you, I really think, let me back up, I really think you're probably still within this broad spectrum of 2 to 4 inches of sleet and snow. We'll go a little bit forward here, and what we'll find is we put Futurecast into motion. We're really honing in this general vicinity. We're starting off as rain, 7 o'clock in the morning, probably some sleet pellets mixed in, a true mixed bag precipitation early with those temperatures just pretty much hovering right around that freezing mark. But it'll take a little bit longer for this cool air that's bottled up north to spill down. I think sleet is going to be your predominant precipitation type before everything eventually transitions over into snow, let's say by 4 or 5 o'clock tomorrow evening. And then it should stay snow pretty much all after sunset before things wrap up early on Wednesday morning.
All right, well, you just said sleet. Someone asked us, will there be sleet at 5 a.m.? Not sure where they live, though.
Yeah, it all depends on where we live. So we'll put this back into motion. Futurecast is a great tool. It's not perfect. It's not the gospel. At the end of the day, it's a computer model. And as good as those can be, it's really just used to give us a general idea. This is going to be 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. I think sleet starting to cross that Oklahoma-Arkansas state line, a little bit of snow in Benton County. Sleet's probably going to be the most common precip type from, let's say, the Bobby Hopper Tunnel south initially, before things eventually transition over. But it's going to take some time. It's not going to happen quickly. In fact, we'll be dealing with sleet across a broad spectrum of the River Valley into the early afternoon hours. I wouldn't expect that transition to happen until at the earliest 2 o'clock, probably closer to 4 o'clock in the River Valley. Once we get to that, there it is again, that I-40 corridor.
Okay, this is a very location-specific question. Ready?
Love it.
What is the snow amount prediction for East Springdale? I am slightly south of East 412. Hard to get an idea on the map. Big amount range difference, it seems. We always seem to get more of everything on the east side of Springdale. Yeah,
that's a good question. So East 412, so here's Springdale. So 412 running pretty much right where my finger is right here. I've got you technically in that 4 to 8 inch range, but you're going to notice a pretty sharp increase the further north you go. So look, these ranges exist for a reason, right? So we can't exactly predict the exact neighborhoods those heavier snow bands are going to be moving in through. But I'll tell you, the further north up 49 you go, if I had to guess, and we're on 5+ here, we're not on television. If I had to guess, I'd say Springdale probably ends up closer to this 8 inch range. I'll tell you, so we updated this map. Honestly, I've lost track of time. I don't know when we updated it. About 3, 4 o'clock this afternoon. We're getting new data in every single hour, and we're pouring over it between commercial breaks, between shows, between hits here on 5+. And I'll tell you, I think I may have to update this one more time. I think I might be a little too conservative as things continue to shift further south. These numbers may very well increase a little bit. The highest axis may shift a little bit further towards the south as that cold air continues to come in. So right now, I'll tell you, Springdale probably closer to that 8 inch mark. Let me actually do this, Alexander, if you don't mind. I'd like to pull up some of the newest data, and let's just go over this in real time. Haven't had a chance to look at this in a second, but what we'll do, maybe this gives us a pretty decent idea of some of the things that are evolving. Let's look at places like Springdale. elsewhere, get an idea. This first model is going to be the high resolution rapid refresh model. This is one that's coming in every hour. But to be clear, I'm not calling for any of these numbers you're about to see on your screen. This is just a model that we use to give us a decent idea of what could happen. These are computer models. They're not perfect, although I will tell you this one is starting to line up with a lot of what we're seeing. It puts Fayetteville and Huntsville in a corridor of about 8 inches. That falls within our range, maybe technically just barely outside of it. That's one of the reasons why I wonder if we might not need to increase things. But you can see that band far northern Benton County. You get close to that Missouri state line, you're looking at some serious accumulation. Now in the River Valley, you know, you look at these numbers and are they what you had back in January? No. But here's the thing, I wouldn't necessarily just think this is going to be a low impact event because it's only going to be an inch in Boonville or only an inch in Fort Smith. Because the temperatures are going to drop so low, roads are going to get slicker than snot, and they're going to stay that way for at least a day or two. Road crews do an incredible job, and we're thankful for them, and they're really efficient at what they do, but Mother Nature is going to make their job a lot harder this time. So that was one model. I'm going to do something else. The European model. It's one of the 2 major global models. This one doesn't update every hour, but this one has had the best handle on this system for the last several days. As it's getting closer and closer, it's apparent that this one was exhibiting some true skill here, and puts those higher totals, similar placement. Details are a little bit different. This one wants to bring close to 8.5 in Bentonville, so you can certainly see a difference. That's why we have to use a lot of our own experience and our own education and training to figure out which models are doing well, which are doing worse. But you bring a good 6.5 to 7 through Fayetteville and Huntsville there. So you get back to that question in Springdale. I think you probably trend closer to 8, but it's really going to come down to where that heaviest snow band sets up. And at this point, I'll tell you, I think it's going to be north of Fayetteville. But boy, if things keep shifting south, as these models have been indicating today, that certainly could be a little bit different story.
And I know you're following, excuse me, several different models, but looks like Bentonville is going to get buried no matter what with this. Well, let's talk about power outages for a second. We have some questions coming out of Benton County and Sebastian County. People there want to know, and really everywhere, of course, what is the likelihood that the power could go out tomorrow for people in Northwest Arkansas and the River Valley?
Look, it's low, right? But it's not 0. It never is. I'll say it's really low in Benton County when it comes to precipitation. Boy, I was working one event. We were looking at winter weather, and when it came to icing and the potential for power outages, the odds were low. We weren't going to have a lot of ice. But interestingly enough, there was a slick spot on the roadway. A car has an accident, hits a power line. You have power outages, right? So it really kind of comes down to what's the genesis of these power outages. There's a lot of crazy things that can happen out there. When it comes to the ice potential, I would definitely say the potential is low in Northwest Arkansas because we're looking at mostly snow. Not only are we looking at mostly snow, as we talked about earlier, it's going to be really dry snow. You get into the River Valley where that potential of a little bit of ice is there. Let's do the same thing we just did. Let's look at some raw weather model data and get an idea of what the latest guidance suggests. This is going to be the European. Again, it's not the gospel, but it's done a pretty good job. And it's going to say we're looking at primarily south of Interstate 40. We get back into Scott County. We had some viewers there this evening texting those questions in. We're at about 0.2 of an inch from Boonville through Waldron, getting close to Poteau of ice. Is that anything to shake your head at? No, not necessarily. Those are some numbers that are going to cause some road issues without question. But when it comes to power outages, you typically need about a 1/2 inch or more before you start to see impact. So with those numbers in mind, and you kind of look at these overall categories, this is what we can expect. Some light icing on trees, cars, other surfaces. It's not going to be safe driving out there, treacherous for sure, but you really want north of that 1/4 inch mark, really closer to about a 1/2 inch. Most power companies will tell you. That's when you start to have widespread power outages. If it happens, it's definitely south of I-40. I would say better confidence from the southern half of LaFleur into Scott, maybe even southern Sebastian. But even then, I don't necessarily think there's a significant cause for alarm with this. We get really nervous about power outages, and I get it. Back in '09, a lot of us were without power for a couple of weeks, $80 million worth of damage. Is this that? This is not that. Let me be very clear. This is not that. This is going to be some light icing that may be an isolated power outage or two, but overall, I don't think many of us are going to lose power. Great question, though.
Yeah, that's some good news there. You were just mentioning the roads. One of our viewers would like us to mention that if you have to be out there, anyone who has to be out on the roads tomorrow, to remind everyone to just move over for all the stalled vehicles, especially the vehicles with hazard lights. And of course, we got to give those snowplows a lot of room to work as well.
They have a tough job. It's not a safe job, but they're going to be out there doing it. They're really good at it. And so you're exactly right. It's a great reminder. Saw another reminder that was texted in. Check the engines, make sure there wasn't a cat or a pet. Try to find some warm place to stay before you get in there. And if you got to be out and about, hopefully everyone can just be home. But if you got to be out and about, I know some folks have to go to work. Hey, I get it. I'm one of them. But just be mindful of those things for sure.
Me too. I'm going to take it very slowly tomorrow. All right, someone asked, Scott, do you think Crawford County gets added to the winter storm warning?
That's a good question. Does Crawford County get added to the winter storm warning? Interestingly enough, I think that is a very nuanced answer to that question. You get some big elevation differences. You get from the river bottoms there, but you start going up towards Mountainburg. You get a little bit of elevation in there. You're probably going to be looking at a little bit different setup, a little bit different outcome as compared to maybe in places like Alma and Van Buren. So do I think so? These are those moments I remind myself I predict the weather. I don't predict what the Weather Service is going to do. Weather Service Mets, meteorologists, incredible folks. They're doing a good job. They're looking at the data just as much as we are. I think there's a decent chance for sure. I've been looking. I've got the map actually on one of my other computers over here. I keep looking to make sure they're not drawing it a little bit further south. What they're looking for, I'll just give you how the sausage is made. They're reviewing this data and they're saying, do we have confidence that we're going to meet these thresholds that we're required to meet? And as things have evolved today and things have pushed further south, they've been making some tweaks and some adjustments. If you remember this morning, the River Valley was not under that advisory. And inevitably, with the new data coming in, they said, you know what, we got enough confidence. Let's add the River Valley to the advisory. Let's upgrade Northwest to that warning. Those things can and certainly will be evaluated almost every minute out of the Tulsa and Little Rock Weather Service offices.
Well, you've shown us a few predictive models, and so someone asked, could you see those snow totals being upgraded?
Yes. Yeah, let's just do this in real time. I have no problem showing you how the sausage is made. No reason to keep this secret. Let's just look through things. I showed you the HRRR, I showed you the Euro. I'll show you, let's see, what do we want to do here? I'll show you the GFS ensemble. This is one of the American models. This is running through, well, for Thursday, but it's fine. I'll tell you, it's starting to shake up a little bit higher. This is one of the models that's done the poorest job thus far. So we look at the performance of these over the last several days, and based off of how they're doing, how they're handling the weather, and were they right, were they wrong, how bad were they wrong, or did they nail it? We ask ourselves those questions, and we get those answers to dictate to ourselves how much stock we're going to put into some of these models. I showed you the European earlier. It was doing really well. This one, the GFS, not so well. So we take some of this with a little bit of grain of salt, but I'll tell you, it's really caught on board today with that southerly push of cold air. So could these numbers be upgraded? Absolutely. This model would indicate that I'm a little bit low between Fayetteville and Huntsville. One of the things that a lot of folks will know him, one of the things that Garrett Lewis taught me as a young kid that has stuck with me for many, 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 many years. You live by the models, die by the models. These things, they're computer guidance, they're good tools, but they're not the gospel. They have their flaws. So while I'm showing you 9.7, 10.45, those are, look, I don't think a lot of this is realistic, okay? Especially given its past performance. I show it to you only because we're here on 5+. I don't want anyone looking at this thinking, oh, Scott's calling for 12 inches in Bentonville. If anyone gets 12, it probably is going to be Bentonville and North. But key takeaway is, if we adjusted our forecast every time the model changed, I wouldn't stop adjusting the forecast. We got to use these as tools, but we rely on our own knowledge of the local area, of how winter weather works, and their skills, their strengths, their weaknesses, their flaws, and that's when we make our forecast. So I showed you that. It's one of the ranges of possibility, but I think things have been shifting all day long, and that's a long answer. Let me get back to the point. Let me get back to the question, are these totals going to increase? Things have been trending up all day long. What I'm going to be asking myself over the next hour, over the next 2 hours, after I get some more coffee, of course, is does that trend continue? And if that trend continues, I'm going to get out ahead of it and I'm going to update my numbers. But maybe we've reached some equilibrium. Maybe the models have said, oh, finally we've caught on board and this is as high as it's going to go, in which case we stay put with where we're at.
All right. I like getting the thorough explanation with that. Thank you for showing us how the sausage is made. All right. Someone pointed out that it's going to be partially sunny on Wednesday, and we might see more of the sun on Thursday and Friday. So even though our temperatures will be below freezing, can the sun melt some of that snow accumulation?
Boy, it sure helps. How effective is it? I don't think it's going to be super effective. You get back to a situation like back in January where we did have a little bit of sun and we warmed up even just a few degrees above freezing, and melting was somewhat efficient, and we weren't stuck at home for more than a day or two. In this case, temperatures are expected to be so stinking low that I'll be honest, I don't know how much sunshine's going to be able to do on its own. I'll pull up the 7-day forecast here just to give you an idea. These are actual temperatures. Wind chills are going to be a significant concern for us Wednesday and Thursday. Wind chills don't really mean a lick at anything when it comes to melting. It's all about the actual real temperature. At 23 on Thursday, how much of that sunshine really matters? First of all, I don't think it's going to melt. I don't think that sunshine's going to be able to overcome 23, but if it does, you're melting and you're just refreezing. So it's not really making a lick of difference. By Friday, Northwest Arkansas maybe climbs above freezing briefly by a couple of degrees. I'll tell you, depending on how much snow is on the ground, I may be wrong here, and it really is going to come down to how much snow is on the ground. We may stay right at that freezing mark. Typically, 1 or 2 or 3 degrees isn't something most folks notice. In this case, it's going to make a huge, significant difference. By Saturday, expect some more melting, but here's the thing. Going into the overnight hours Sunday, it all refreezes. So we'll be dealing with this snow and whatever sleet and ice is on the ground for at least several days. Next week, we're back in the 60s. That's something to look forward to. I'll show you the River Valley numbers here. 6 to low Thursday, -10 is what it's going to feel like. Again, we really care about the actual temperatures, briefly warming above freezing come Friday, depending on how much snow, sleet is on the ground. Again, that makes a big difference. That layer of frozen material can certainly keep us a little bit lower. By Saturday, I think we're starting to improve, but again, black ice, a real concern. Probably through early next week, depending on how much melting is able to happen. I don't think the sun's going to be able to do it all on its own, unfortunately.
Scott, you've done a fantastic job answering all of our viewers' questions, and I've run out, but I have a question for you.
I'm happy to answer. This is probably going to be the hardest one.
Probably. I'm not trying to stump you. So you said during one of our early evening newscasts that, we were talking about RDOT putting the salt mixture on the roads, pre-treating the roads, and that can go a long way, of course, and we're so grateful they're doing that. But you said that at a certain temperature,
That's right.
really cold temperature, that mixture is not so effective. Can you share what range it stops working so well?
Unfortunately, I can't, simply because I don't know the exact makeup of their composition. I know they alter it, and they're probably adjusting it based off of the weather forecast. But here's the thing. Once it gets so low, that salt brine and that moisture, that mixture they're trying to put out on the roads, it's only so effective. The last event started as rain, so they were really unable to pre-treat a lot of the roads, otherwise it would just wash off. This case, with most of it starting as snow and or sleet, they're probably going to, I know they're already out there, right? We've been reporting they're already out there and they're doing great work. We've talked to RDOT, but in this case, once those temperatures drop, we're talking, single digits, that salt brine, that mixture, it's just not effective on the roadways. There's just only so much beet juice and chemicals you can put down on the roadways, and it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't work. So I'm sure they'll transition to some salt and some sand to help give us a little bit of traction, but even then, that's all they're doing. They're not really improving the actual issue of that layer of ice on the roads.
I had no idea that it just becomes less effective the colder it gets. So that is really good to know. And no one is ever invincible out on the roads. Of course, we want everyone, if you have to go out tomorrow, a lot of schools have closed, a lot of businesses are closing, but don't go out there if you don't need to. And Scott, we are going to wrap this up. You've done an amazing job answering all these questions. Thank you so much for doing this. And thank you to all of our viewers who've been tuning in on 5+.
Can I give a couple of final thoughts? I almost throw you for a whammy here.
Please do.
My mind's full of things I want folks to know and be prepared for. Don't sleep on the fact that things are about to get really stinking cold. We're talking some very, very cold wind chills. This is Wednesday, but by Thursday, we're talking as low as -20, as low as -10 the River Valley. That's dangerous. Check on your friends. Check on the elderly. If you got a pet, first of all, what the heck are they doing living outside anyways? That's another story. Bring them inside. Make sure they can stay warm, whatever it is. If you got livestock, I know you're already prepared. You've been looking at the forecast more than meteorologists have been looking at the forecast. Make sure those troughs of water don't freeze up. A couple other thoughts. Right here on 5+ is your absolute #1 stop for most up-to-date weather information starting, well, really now. I'm going to be posting updates right here all night long. But starting tomorrow, I'm going to have us on this stream live. Myself, Stephen Elmore, Joshua Weisel. We're going to be providing around-the-clock updates as those first flurries and sleet pellets begin to fly. Road conditions, tracking that all day long. We've got the Storm Chaser gassed up and ready to be out there all day long as well. So happy to see you here. This is your one-stop shop until this event wraps up and we're in the 60s next week. This is where you can find all the most up-to-date information. Bye.